Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a truly unique stack of sources today. We are pulling together a famous piece of 19th century literature, an ancient commentary on a really heartbreaking story from the Book of Numbers, landmark 1970s psychology studies, and some very modern behavioral economics.
Yeah, it's quite the eclectic mix, but the fascinating thing is that they all converge on this one incredibly persistent human problem.
And that problem is basically our mission for today. We are investigating a fundamental dilemma that you, me, really everyone faces. Why it is getting exactly what we think we want, more money, the newest device, a bigger house, so often leave us feeling totally empty.
Right, and more importantly, using these sources, how can we fundamentally change the mechanics of how we actually pursue happiness?
Exactly. So to really understand the scope of this,
Yeah.
I want you to picture a man who has lost absolutely everything. His name is Silas Marner.
The classic George Eliot novel.
Yeah, exactly. He's the protagonist. He's a weaver living in this small English village, and he has been utterly betrayed by his closest friends. He loses his reputation, his community, and basically his entire faith in humanity.
He becomes a total recluse.
Completely. And he essentially shrinks his entire existence down to one obsessive, measurable goal, which is hoarding gold coins. He weaves all day, gets paid, and hides the money.
And the sources note this really striking detail. Every single night, he pulls those coins out of a hole in his floor, counts them, and physically strokes them.
Wow, yeah.
The gold becomes his substitute for human connection. Because he can't trust people anymore, he relies on this tangible, quantitative measure of his own worth.
Right, until the unthinkable happens. His cabin is robbed. The gold is entirely stolen. Silas is plunged into this agonizing emptiness because his whole framework for meaning is just gone.
It's devastating for him.
It is. But then, one freezing snowy night, he walks into his dark little cabin, looks toward the hearth, and he sees a familiar golden glimmer on the floor.
His heart leaps, right?
Oh, completely. His immediate thought is that, by some miracle, his coins have returned to him. So he reaches out his hand to touch the gold, anticipating cold, hard metal. But instead, it's soft. He is touching the golden curls of a sleeping toddler.
A little girl who had wandered in from the snowstorm, her mother had tragically collapsed outside.
Yeah. And Silas takes this little girl, her name is Epi, into his home and adopts her. And this single, totally unexpected event fundamentally transforms his entire life.
Because he has to care for her, which forces him to reconnect with his community.
Exactly. He finds genuine joy, and he discovers this capacity for love that he completely thought was dead.
The story of Silas Marner frames the philosophical foundation of our deep dive perfectly, I think. We are looking at the tension between the quantity of what we hoard, the hard, cold gold coins, and the quality of what we experience, represented by taking in that little girl.
Right.
And to really unpack the mechanics of that tension, we need to transition from George Eliot's snowy English cabin to a completely different environment. We are going to an ancient, scorching desert.
Okay, yes. We are jumping into a very specific chapter in the biblical book of Numbers, a section known as Parashat Chukat. The Israelites are wandering in the desert of Zin, and they are entirely out of water.
Which is a massive crisis.
Totally. As you might expect when a huge population of people and livestock is facing severe dehydration in a wasteland, they are panicking. They are complaining bitterly to their leaders, Moses and Aaron.
They're facing a genuine existential threat. The panic is biologically justified.
Right, it's not just whining. So, in response, God gives Moses and Aaron a very specific set of instructions. They are told to take their staff, gather the assembly, and speak to a specific rock.
The instruction is incredibly explicit. If they just speak to the rock, it will yield water to save the people and their animals.
But the pressure of the moment is immense. Moses is facing this desperate, angry crowd, and he deviates from the instructions. Instead of using his words to speak to the rock, he lifts his staff and physically strikes it.
And the sources bring in a fascinating observation here from Moshe.
The famous 11th century French rabbi, right?
Exactly, the medieval commentator. Rashi points out a crucial detail in the text. When Moses strikes a rock the first time, only a few meager drops of water trickle out.
Barely anything.
Right. So Moses strikes it a second time. And suddenly the text uses a very specific phrase. Abundant water gushes out. Mei Merivah.
A massive, overwhelming flood.
Yes. The people drink, the livestock drink, and the crisis is seemingly averted.
But the aftermath of that moment is incredibly severe. God immediately tells Moses and Aaron that because they failed to trust him and demonstrate his holiness, specifically because they chose to strike the rock instead of speaking to it, they're permanently barred from entering the promised land.
It's a catastrophic, life-altering punishment for what really seems like a minor procedural error, right?
Well, let's play devil's advocate here for a second. When you read the text, it goes out of its way to emphasize that abundant water came out. Mei Merivah. If you are dying of thirst in a barren desert, an absolute ocean of fresh water sounds like the ultimate undeniable blessing. I mean, it feels like God saw the severity of the situation and gave them a massive upgrade. How could producing an abundance of a life-saving resource possibly be framed as a failure?
See, that reaction exposes our deepest, most ingrained bias. We automatically equate more with better.
Volume feels like success.
Exactly. But there's a revolutionary interpretation from the early 20th century scholar Rabbi Meir Simcha of Dvinsk in his philosophical work, the Parashat Chukat, that completely dismantles that assumption.
Okay, break that down for us.
He introduces this profound mechanism for understanding blessings. He says, when something comes from a place of ultimate divine goodwill, its value is defined by its quality, not its quantity.
Wait, help me translate that into the mechanics of what actually happened at the rock.
Sure. If Moses had followed the instructions and spoken to the rock, he would have been establishing a relationship of intellect and spirit dictating physical reality. Mind over matter.
Oh, I see.
And the Parashat Chukat argues that in that elevated qualitative state, they wouldn't have needed a massive flood. A single miraculous drop of that water would have possessed such a profound qualitative power that it would have instantly biochemically satisfied the thirst of the entire nation.
Wait, really? A single drop?
Yes. It would have sustained them from the inside out.
So the flood of water, the Mei Merivah that came out after the second strike, wasn't a bigger miracle.
Not at all. It was a massive downgrade. By striking the rock, Moses resorted to brute physical force, matter over matter.
He brought the whole situation down to the mundane laws of physics.
Exactly. The water lost its transcendent qualitative nature. So God essentially had to compensate for the loss of quality by supplying a massive physical quantity of normal water, just to keep their biology functioning.
Like watering a herd of cattle.
Exactly like that. The sheer abundance of the water was the physical proof that the blessing had actually been diminished.
Wow. The abundance was the downgrade. That ancient desert commentary perfectly exposes the exact trap we fall into today. We constantly rely on sheer volume to satisfy us because the underlying quality of our experiences is missing.
We constantly try to solve qualitative voids with quantitative floods.
That's beautifully said. I mean, look at your own life. Think about the last time you upgraded your phone. You spend months anticipating it. You finally unbox the newest model, your brain gets flooded with dopamine, and you feel this incredible surge of satisfaction. You feel like you've arrived.
Oh, yeah. The unboxing high.
But 2 weeks later, the magic is entirely gone. It is no longer a miraculous piece of technology. It is just the glowing piece of glass you use to check your work emails. And almost immediately, you start looking at the tech blogs for next year's rumors.
Just trying to figure out how to manufacture that initial surge again.
Exactly.
And, that rapid decay of satisfaction isn't a personal failing. It is a heavily documented biological and psychological mechanism.
This is where we get to the 1970s psychology.
Yes. A landmark 1978 study by psychologists Philip Brickman, Dan Coates, and Ronnie Janoff-Bullman, they decided to test the ultimate injection of quantitative wealth. They studied people who had just won the lottery.
Oh, wow. These are individuals who experienced a massive overnight flood of abundant water. Millions of dollars.
Exactly. They wanted to see if sheer volume actually changes the human equation. So they compared these new millionaires to a control group of average people. And they also compared them to a group of people who had recently suffered devastating accidents and become paralyzed.
That is an intense methodology looking at the absolute extreme ends of human fortune.
It is. But within just 1 year, the psychological data revealed something that completely defies common sense. The lottery winners were no happier than the control group of average citizens.
Not at all.
Nope. And even more alarming, the lottery winners reported deriving significantly less joy from everyday mundane events than the rest of the population.
Wait, so the data is saying that handing someone millions of dollars actually damages their ability to enjoy, like, a good cup of coffee or a joke with a friend?
Yes. The sheer volume of their new wealth created a massive spike in stimulation, which caused their brain's reward centers to recalibrate entirely. Normal, everyday pleasures just no longer registered. They essentially became numb to the world around them.
And the comparison to the paralyzed group makes this even more profound. You have a millionaire on one side and someone who just suffered a life-altering physical tragedy on the other.
Right. And while the paralyzed group obviously experienced a massive, devastating drop in initial happiness, the psychological assessments a year later showed something incredible. Their baseline happiness levels had rebounded. They were shockingly close to the baseline of the lottery winners.
That is wild. The human brain just adapts to the new normal. Adding a massive influx of quantity to your life does not permanently elevate your baseline of joy.
Which perfectly illustrates a concept our sources note was coined in 1971 by Brickman and Donald Campbell. Most people have heard the term but rarely understand the mechanics of it. The hedonic treadmill.
Oh yeah. The physics of a literal treadmill make it a brutally accurate metaphor too.
You step onto a treadmill and start running. You can push yourself to maximum effort, sweating, heart pounding, burning through all your resources. But the belt is continuously moving backward at the exact same speed you are running forward.
So you expend a massive amount of energy, but you make zero geographic progress.
You are exhausted, but you haven't moved an inch.
You just keep buying more stuff, chasing a higher salary, endlessly trying to outrun your own neurological adaptation. But there is a secondary feature to the treadmill metaphor that makes it truly terrifying.
Oh, the stopping.
Yes, you can't just stop. If you are sprinting at 10 miles an hour on a treadmill and you suddenly decide you have enough and stop moving your legs, you don't get to stand peacefully in place.
You get violently thrown off the back of the machine.
Exactly. Psychologically, if you build your entire life around consuming quantity and you suddenly halt, like if the packages stop arriving and the superficial dopamine hits dry up, you crash into a depressive void. The silence becomes unbearable.
So you find yourself forced to keep consuming, not because it makes you feel good anymore, but simply to maintain your emotional equilibrium. You literally run just to keep from falling.
So if throwing money and material wealth at our lives just speeds up the belt on the treadmill, how do we hack the system? If the gold coins didn't work for Silas Marner, where should we actually be directing our energy and resources?
Well, the psychological research points heavily toward the distinction between possessions and experiences. Psychologist Tim Kasser conducted longitudinal studies revealing a really clear inverse relationship between materialism and well-being.
Meaning, the more materialistic you are, the less happy you are.
Exactly. Individuals highly focused on external quantitative goals, wealth, image, status consistently reported lower vitality, reduced life satisfaction, and significantly higher levels of anxiety.
And then psychologist Thomas Gilovich takes that data and tackles the core consumer paradox we all struggle with. Because our basic human intuition insists that buying a physical object is the most logical investment of our resources.
Right. We tell ourselves, if I buy this expensive watch or this piece of luxury furniture, I will have it for 10 years. If I spend that same amount of money on a weekend vacation or a cooking class, it is over in 48 hours.
But Gilovich's research proved that this seemingly bulletproof logic is entirely backward. How can a 2-hour concert or a rainy, miserable camping trip possibly be a better investment than a luxury car that I drive every single day?
Gilovich outlines 3 specific mechanisms that explain why experiences consistently yield higher, more durable psychological returns than physical possessions. The first mechanism is the one we touched on earlier, rapid adaptation.
Which goes right back to the smartphone. We adapt to physical objects because they are static. They sit on our wrist or in our living room and quickly fade into the background wallpaper of our lives.
But an experience is dynamic. You take a trip, and as time passes, your brain actually edits out the stressful parts of travel and enhances the positive memories.
That's so true. The experience grows sweeter in your mind, whereas the physical object only degrades.
Right. Now, the second mechanism Gilovich identified is social comparison. Physical objects are inherently quantifiable, which makes them incredibly easy to compare against what others have.
Oh, I see this all the time. You can buy a perfectly good, reliable car, feel great about it for 2 days, and then your neighbor pulls into their driveway with a slightly newer model with a nicer trim package. Instantly, your car feels inadequate.
The physical object breeds an environment of constant toxic jealousy. But you cannot easily compare a deeply personal experience.
Because it's unique to you.
Exactly. A unique weekend trip you took with your family to a strange little cabin cannot be objectively measured against your neighbor's luxury cruise. The value of the experience is entirely internal, which protects it from the corrosive effects of social comparison.
And the third mechanism is storytelling, which honestly might be the most powerful of all. Think about that miserable, rainy weekend camping trip. The tent leaks, everyone is freezing, the food gets completely ruined, and at the time it feels like an absolute disaster.
But a year later.
That disaster turns into a hilarious identity-building narrative. Your family tells the story at every holiday gathering. It bonds you together. You simply cannot get that kind of shared narrative or relational bonding from purchasing a flat-screen television.
The TV just sits on the wall.
Exactly. The ruined camping trip becomes part of your shared lore.
And this brings us to the ultimate epiphany of the entire deep dive. This is the central mechanism that ties the ancient desert, the lottery winners, and Gilovich's research together. We are really looking at the fundamental structural difference between quantity materialism and quality experiences and learning.
This is the core focus. It all comes down to the specific question each pursuit is trying to answer. Quantity adding more wealth, more stuff, chasing superficial status, is designed to answer one question: what do I have?
It's an act of accumulation. You are adding items to your inventory.
Right.
You can travel to 50 different countries just to check them off a bucket list. You can speed read 100 books just to brag about your reading count. And you can amass 5,000 connections on a social networking platform. But if your underlying motivation is purely to collect those things as external items, you remain the exact same person. The collection exists entirely outside of you.
The pile of possessions gets bigger, but your internal capacity does not. You are just standing next to a larger pile of stuff.
Quality, however, operates on a completely different psychological axis. Pursuing quality answers a much deeper question. Who am I?
It shifts from accumulation to transformation.
Exactly. Psychologists use the term self-unifying experience to describe this. When you engage in a period of deep, focused study, when you commit an act of genuine moral courage that costs you something, or when you build a truly profound relationship, these are not items you place on a mental shelf.
They act as a gravitational pull.
They do. They neurologically and psychologically reorganize your consciousness around a new center. You don't just have more information or another friend, you fundamentally become a different person.
Which brings us full circle, right back to the desert of Zen and the profound insight from the Meshech Chokhmah about the water. The quality water, those miraculous few drops that God originally intended to provide through the act of speaking to the rock, was meant to be a self-unifying experience for the Israelites.
Yes.
It was designed to create a biopsychological change inside them. It was supposed to change who they were so that they would fundamentally require less from the physical world to be satisfied.
It was an invitation to internal transformation. The failure was that they received an external fix instead.
The abundant water, the massive physical flood that poured out when Moses resorted to striking the rock, only changed their external surroundings. It temporarily filled their stomachs, but it left them the exact same thirsty, dependent people they were before.
And because their internal identity remained unchanged, their thirst was mathematically guaranteed to return.
They were going to require more and more and more, trapping them in the desert on an ancient version of the hedonic treadmill.
If the change isn't internal, the hunger never stops. And this is where ancient wisdom perfectly predates modern psychological science. Our sources mention a famous maxim from the ancient sage Benzoma, who posed a really simple question: who is rich?
And his answer was profound: he who rejoices in his lot.
True wealth is not a metric of physical abundance. It is an internal psychological trait. It is an orientation toward the world that allows you to extract deep meaning from whatever is in front of you.
It is absolutely fascinating that the sources point out David Ben-Gurion, the primary founder and first prime minister of Israel, actually summarized the entirety of Jewish history using these exact three words: quality versus quantity.
It is the defining struggle of human civilization. Do we build our lives around what we have or who we are?
So bringing this down to a practical level requires looking at the micro choices we make every single day. Stepping off the treadmill is not a one-time event. It is a daily practice.
It really is.
Think about your schedule today. When you have a free hour this evening, are you going to passively scroll through short-form videos to get a high quantity of cheap, effortless stimulation? Or are you going to sit down and read one challenging chapter of a complex book that demands your focus and might actually change how you perceive the world?
Right. Are you going to take on unnecessary overtime hours to get a little extra cash to marginally increase what you have? Or are you going to go home, put your phone in another room, and invest in a deeply present conversation with your family to build who you are?
It requires a conscious, sometimes uncomfortable effort to reject the default setting of accumulation and actively choose the friction of transformation. There's an incredibly charming anecdote in our source notes from the author about their late father that perfectly encapsulates this daily choice.
Oh, I love this part.
When this man would go to a cafe and order an espresso, the barista would invariably ask him, "Do you want it long or short?" Meaning, do you want us to add a lot of hot water to increase the volume of the drink? Or do you just want the concentrated shot?
The classic choice between quantity and quality.
Exactly. And the father would always, without fail, answer short. His reasoning was brilliant in its simplicity. He would say, "You don't drink espresso to quench your physical thirst. If you are thirsty, order a glass of water. You drink espresso for the concentrated, undiluted enjoyment of the flavor."
Choosing a short espresso is the ultimate everyday metaphor for choosing quality.
It is the deliberate choice to experience the pure, potent essence of a thing, rather than watering it down just to have the illusion of more in your cup.
That's such a great way to look at it.
So looking back at the journey we've taken today, we started with Silas Marner, a man who nearly destroyed his own soul because he believed his worth was entirely defined by the sheer quantity of gold he could hoard under his floorboards.
And he only found his salvation when he surrendered his obsession with what he had and embraced the quality of love he could give to a child, which fundamentally changed who he was.
From there, we examined the Israelites in the desert of Zin, discovering that an overwhelming abundance of water can actually be a devastating downgrade if it strips away a transcendent, qualitative experience meant to elevate your consciousness.
We saw how modern psychology completely validates this ancient wisdom. The data proves that lottery winners end up no happier than the rest of us. They get trapped on a hedonic treadmill, forced to run at exhausting speeds, consuming more and more just to keep from falling into despair.
Because the human brain is wired to normalize physical abundance, which brought us to the ultimate realization. Materialism and possessions only answer the superficial question, what do I have?
While true experiences, rigorous learning, and profound relationships answer the foundational question, who am I?
Because at the end of the day, true wealth is never about what we hoard. It is entirely about who we become.
This leaves us with a critical thought to consider as we close. Modern society, the attention economy, and our entire advertising infrastructure are fundamentally designed to keep you running on that hedonic treadmill.
Yeah, they really are.
They spend billions of dollars to convince you that the next injection of quantity will finally bring you peace. Knowing that the system is rigged against your psychological well-being, how can you consciously design an act of rebellion today? What is one short espresso moment you can create tonight? A conversation, an hour of deep focus, a moment of stillness that won't add a single physical item to your inventory, but might just change a tiny part of who you are.
That is a brilliant question to leave off on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, and we'll catch you next time.